Why must there be so much darkness? Years ago, when I taught a fair number of Sunday school classes, I was in the Fisher Room on Epiphany with a group of kids, and I told them the story about the star and the wise men crossing borders into a new risky venture. And then I invited them to go outside and look at the stars. And of course, they couldn't see them. Except one astute student said, "The sun." I said, "Correct, that is a star." But the conversation turned to how stars can only be found in the dark. Darkness, and this relationship between darkness and light. In our mindfulness group, we've been working on a book called No Mud, No Lotus. The connection between suffering and joy. That they are intertwined with each other as are darkness and light. And he retells the creation story by saying, God said, "Let there be light." And the light responded, "I cannot exist without darkness. You must have darkness." God said, "There's darkness. Come, be present." The connection between those are mystery, but if we resist that fact, that there can only be light, of course we know that's not true. The contrast between those makes that impossible. Now, why I love Epiphany so much is because it has zero theology in it. I find that ministering to me as a former seminarian. It's, interestingly enough, a story about Eastern wisdom coming to visit Jesus. It's not a story about theology or doctrine. It's about a star and a baby. It's not about thoughts or but about feelings, about intuition, about awareness. If you will, it's a sensory encounter. The vast beauty of the solar system and an intimate encounter with the vulnerability of life. It is primarily sensual in nature, not about coming together to get a new thought. This bodily experience is profound. They're not talking with Jesus. They're perhaps lifting him up. Perhaps remembering their own children. Perhaps be mindful of their own childhood. It is almost an unconscious experience. And when we read Isaiah today about the darkness that covers the earth and the thick darkness that covers the people, that too goes right to our gut. It gets to us in our body. The body is often disregarded in Western theology. It's sort of like, it's there and then it dies. But in fact, Scripture talks about our bodies as the temple of God. The temple of God as being a source, a place that absorbs our experiences, all of our experiences, including the dark ones. So darkness is a part of the story because it's part of the human story, part of every one of our personal stories. Much like the wise men finding a way through such darkness, we will arrive at the child that is in each of us. It's not an easy journey, but it is the only journey that will lead us to peace, healing, and joy. And like the wise man, the journey through the darkness is best done with other wise friends. Don't do it alone. It can be utterly overwhelming. The longest ongoing study on happiness started at Harvard University in 1936. It's had 4 directors through the decades, and it's a fascinating study you can read about in the book entitled The Good Life: Lessons from the Longest Scientific Study on Happiness. The recent TED Talk by one of the book's authors has been viewed 42 million times. I guess happiness is important. Here's the bottom line. Those who lived good lives, happy lives, had one thing in common: warm relationships. I love that they include the word warm, which surprises me. For a research person to use that word, it doesn't seem very scientific. But when they truly looked at that, they had to use the word warm. That word warmth is everything. It reminded me, on one level, of Proverbs 18:12, and you may be shocked to hear this proverb. A man with many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother or a sister. The contrast between any old relationship and a warm relationship. There's wisdom in that. We should pay attention to that. Warmth in relationships requires trust, vulnerability, intimacy, openness, and compassion. It requires presence. It requires showing up in real ways, not just with your mind, but with a vulnerable heart. It reminds us of the first commandment. Love your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength. And love your neighbor as you love yourself. Warmth is about emotional connection, empathy, and shared experience. If your relationships feel distant and cold, it might be a sign that you are distanced or mean or cold to yourself. That is where it begins. You cannot receive that which you are not giving to yourself. So there's actually 2 elements here. First, you must believe that you can have a relationship with yourself. We don't often think about that. If you really think about it, it's obvious. Like, see how you think. Oh, I should do this, or I felt weird about that, or this really bothered me. You start to have a conversation with yourself. You start to evaluate, you reflect. Reflection is a conversation. Awareness, understanding is a conversation with yourself. So that's the first thing to embrace. The second is to then be able to evaluate, how's that relationship going? Do you distance yourself from your emotions or even bury them in fear? Many of us put our relationship with ourselves on the back burner, and many haven't really thought about it or prioritized it. And almost universally, those who accept that they have a relationship with themselves, on a scale to 1 to 10, always place it down below a 5. We are aware that we are not very good at taking care of ourselves, having a relationship with ourselves. I would say that if we want to have that good life the study talks about, we don't try to move away from ourselves or ignore what's going on in your heart or in your story or in your past. The past is actually very present. You know how the past is present to you? You think the past is over? But the past is actually present in your body. Trauma is not what happened to you. It's how you responded to what happened to you. And that is embedded in the body, in your temple. It's right here. And so being able to have some compassion for those things that trigger you is truly, truly important. So I would say that the first step towards experiencing God's presence is to be open to yourself in all of its glorious, messy complexity. It's messy. The child within us knows the messiness well. Jesus spoke often about welcoming the child that can enjoy the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, the child that can play, but also the child that suffers and carries trauma, perhaps trauma upon trauma. The child beckons us to pick her or him up and rock them. And what Thich Nhat Hanh says in that reflection is that true mindfulness, true meditation, true prayer involves welcoming that child in all of his or her emotional states, whatever it is. And he models it. Hello, my anger. Welcome. I will take good care of you. Hello, sadness and despair. Let me hold you like a mother holds her child. Come here, my grief. Sit on my lap and cry. I will share your tears and sorrow in such mindfulness. You may find that God is right there saying, I have shared your grief. I am sharing your grief. It's okay. It will be okay. Reminiscent of Revelation 21, verse 4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the former things have passed away. Having the faith to walk through thick darkness will lead to new life. This week I found myself reading articles about Jimmy Carter's Sunday school classes. I think we are walking through thick darkness as a parish right now. We lost Rob McCann. We lost Fran Toy, two amazing leaders of St. John's. This week we lost Jimmy Carter, an amazing example of Christian faith and leadership. And I loved his story, the stories that someone who went to this Sunday school often made account of. Sometimes these Sunday school classes would be like 500 people.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't had that problem yet here. But he would ask, are there any visitors here? That would be the first point of humor almost every time he taught. And of course everyone raised their hands, and then he'd say, where are you from? And if anybody said Washington, D.C., he said, I used to live there. Sometimes there were so many people that they had to put them in these auxiliary rooms, stuff them in different places. They all had feeds, TV feeds and so forth in them. They were smaller rooms outside the main event, if you will. And the account was that if you got stuck in this back room, you may have gotten a better deal. Because Jimmy Carter arrived early every time and made a point of walking into each of those rooms, greeting people in a more intimate way, welcoming them, letting them ask questions, and telling stories. I thought this was a wonderful metaphor for those parts of ourselves that get pushed to the back room because of the overcrowding pressures of life. Think about what be pushed into the back room because you're just too busy, or your thoughts aren't focused, or there's not a sense of care or mindfulness about how you're feeling or why you're feeling the way you're feeling. I like to think of Jimmy Carter as modeling God, who walks through the back rooms where we stuff stuff away, where we don't have room for it, and actually meeting us there. We have to have the courage and love for ourselves to visit the fullness of our story by considering the deep suffering of the child. Your body knows that story well. And your body also is connected to the unconscious. And so, one more thing I might suggest. Pay attention to your dreams. I've started a practice where every night I invite dreams. I say, if I need a word, an image, something I can chew on and reflect on, welcome. You know, dreams can be pretty weird. And yet, if we respect them, we will find that something unconscious, something in your body is trying to put it in a language so you can access it. And that is hugely important. One therapist says that actually dreams are the child trying to express themselves. Maybe that's why it seems like a cry sometimes. Maybe that's why it seems disjointed or illogical. But by paying attention to it, we set a tone to say, whatever I have absorbed through the traumas of my life, I'm paying attention to. I am here for you. You're welcome. Climb upon my lap. We have a tradition here at Epiphany. I always like to suggest you go home by a different way. But I want to qualify that today. Jimmy Carter, at the end of his Sunday school class, always challenged everyone to do a good deed for a stranger and said, I'm going to hold you to it. Might I suggest today that you do a good deed for the child that is in you? A child that may, on some level, have become a bit of a stranger to you. The warmth of being with that child. Make a decision. When you think of your child, what would be a source of warmth, of joy? Paying attention to that part of yourself. What would that look like? I'm going home by a different route. I already bought my ticket. I'm going to a movie this afternoon. I remember enjoying movies, popcorn, what a treat it was, and I don't go very often. And I decided that is what I'm going to do. That simple act of acknowledging that part of yourself and being present to it is very, very important. Make it a warm experience. Make it a caring experience. All warm kindness expressed to yourself will empower you to spread warmth to others. I don't know what different path the wise men took as they returned home. But I like to think that after spending time with God in the form of an infant, that they found themselves thinking about what it was like for them as a child, and imagining that God was and always has been with them.